Welcome to Inside Report. I'm Senior Investigator Bill Marshall with Judicial Watch, and I am so pleased to have a great friend of Judicial Watch and of mine, a best-selling author and documentarian, Jack Cashill, with me today. Jack is the author of 21 books, as well as a prolific column writer at various places, including his own website. And Jack is about to submit a new book for publication. His fourth book, I believe, about the Obama administration and all the shenanigans of the Obama administration. Jack, take it away. Tell us about your new book.
Yeah, Bill, I should tell the audience that you and I went to the same high school, of course, which was part of our bond, although you went much earlier than I did, I being, considerably younger than yourself. No, but that's my one lie for today. I'll get that up. Now, the book is called Unmasking Obama, but my deadline is November 1. The book will be out some months after that. But the subhead really tells the story. And this story leads into the whole Russia collusion, even indirectly into the whole Ukraine story. And that is the fight to tell the true story of a failed presidency. Now, future historians will inevitably, they say that journalism is the first draft of history. Well, if so, future historians are going to have to choose whose version they're going to believe, right? We know how they're aligned typically, but if they're going to be an honest historian, they're going to have to make a hard decision. And here's the lineup as I see it, and I'd like your input on this, Bill. On the left, we have the major media. I mean, all of the networks, save for Fox News, virtually all the major newspapers, except for the editorial section of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post. The networks, and they also have the social media giants, Google, Yahoo, AOL, Facebook, Twitter, and you watched during their campaign how they manipulated the news and manipulated even your inputs into the news. You know that that's a scary new addition. They had this on entire lineup. They also have what I call the firemen, and this reference comes from Fahrenheit 451. The Ray Bradbury classic science fiction novel. If you remember, in that futuristic world, the firemen didn't put out fires, they started fires.
Right.
They burned information, right? They torched books. Their goal was to keep real information, real data out of the hands of inquiring citizens. And that's the role the firemen play today. The major media plays a similar role. The firemen play that role much more aggressively. What they do is they go into, let's say, here the firemen are people like, probably the classic group is Media Matters for America. They have like 100 people sitting in cubicles. You probably have your own case officer there, and their job is to trivialize, ridicule, insult everything you write, and then if need be, go after you personally. Dig up old tweets, old Halloween costumes, whatever. They would make you less credible. Then they're joined by dozens of left-leaning blogs, some more reckless than others, plus smear merchants like the Southern Poverty Law Center, and their whole goal of these people, and there's thousands of them. They come right out of journalism school, is to destroy information, destroy the people who distribute it. And they're closely aligned with major media, and they share the same bars, the same coffee shops, often the same beds. There's a fluid line between one and the other. In the early part of the Obama years, if you recall, Bill, they had a thing called a journal list, in which the bloggers and the firemen could communicate with their more celebrated peers in the major media and share ideas, which is part of the reason why so many punchlines would be repeated in one show after another, after another, after another. Opposing them on the right, it's a little more complicated because you have what I call the responsible conservative media. And I use that word with some bit of irony because sometimes they're much too responsible. That includes, I would say, the National Review. That included the Weekly Standard. It was so responsible, it responsibled itself out of business. Fox News, I would say also the Washington Times, the Wall Street Journal, some have a level of visibility and respectability. And they're very prudent and very cautious. And unlike on the left, where the firemen and the major media intermingle and share ideas all the time, on the right, there's a distance between the samizdat and the responsible right. Now, the samizdat I take from the Russian word, which actually means self-publishing. But during the Soviet years, the samizdat was the word that was used to describe that kind of underground publication and distribution of information, including books like Dr. Zhivago and the Gulag Archipelago. The risks that the people in the samizdat ran were more severe than we run in the American samizdat, although Jerry Corsi might dissent. But the samizdat, a Second Amendment blogger in Arizona has this wonderful phrase to describe. He didn't use the word samizdat, but what he described what was happening on the right was he called it a coalition of willing Lilliputians, right? And that's what we are. We're Lilliputians, and our job is to pull Gulliver down.
Right. Which we're trying to do every day here at Judicial Watch. And believe me, we're much smaller, I think, an organization than many people realize. I mean, we're maybe 50 people strong, mostly located here in our D.C. office, and a few spread around the country. But the enormity of the task in front of us. It's a lot. It's like trying the metaphor I use often is trying to hold back the ocean with a broom. I mean, we're in that. We're those Lilliputians you're talking about. Yeah.
In fact, in the book, I refer to Judicial Watch as the samizdat.doj. So it's interestingly, the Second Amendment guy. This is an example of how it works. He's a blogger, a Second Amendment blogger in Arizona. He's a big gun guy, right? He's responsible for busting Fast and Furious. For the first few months after Brian Terry was killed in 2010, there was no news. Nothing was like, oh, poor guy shot, But I wish I had his name. It tips my tongue. I don't. But he goes in. He talks to the ATF guys. The ATF guys are outraged by having to participate in this program. He starts pushing it up the food chain. He gets a hold of Cheryl Atkinson, then with CBS News, who's an honorary member of the samizdat now for her great work. Katie Pavlich, who is then with Town Hall. And they started pushing it up the food chain. And then Congress, they make enough noise on the Lilliputians make enough noise to alert Congress. Right. This is the way news worked during the Obama years on every single incident, going right up to Russia collusion. Right. And I consider myself a proud member of the samizdat, and I know what it's like.
Yep.
You do a lot of head knocking against the wall, but occasionally, if enough heads are knocked loud enough, someone will hear.
Right. Well, I got to tell you, I really enjoyed, you shared with me the final chapter of your book, and I cannot wait to read the finished product. It's phenomenal. Based on, if I can say, based on that, on reading that last chapter, it's just as the superb, the prose is superb, and as always with your books. And at one point in the chapter, you talk about sort of the odd bedfellows we have, and you touched on it earlier too. You have these left-wing members of the samizdat, these guys like Matt Taibbi, formerly of, I guess, Rolling Stone. You have Glenn Greenwald, I would consider one of them as well, who are aligning now in this weird world we're living in this sort of age of Trump and age of Obama, where you've got them aligning with the likes of the responsible conservative, responsible right, people like yourself and us here at Judicial Watch and others, who are saying, hold on, what's happening now with our government? I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, it was question authority by the left. That was the bumper sticker. That was all the rage, right? And yet now we have, the FBI and the CIA aligning with, the Washington Post and the New York Times, and it's weird to watch the news at night. It's like you see these mainstream reporters from these big, corporate media titans like the New York Times jumping to the defense of the FBI covering stuff up. I'm like, wait a minute, what's happened to journalism? I mean, this is just so bizarre. This is, as one of my favorite talk show guys down here, Chris Plant likes to say in WMAL, is the most and he came from CNN. He says one of the most insidious powers of the media is the power not to report.
That's exactly right.
And this
power to suppress is it's not like they create fake news stories. They do that occasionally, but the suppression of real stories is their real power.
It genuinely is, so that's an area that I really enjoyed about that particular chapter, and where you basically set the stage of how the Obama administration had to suddenly go from coddling Russia during its entire tenure to suddenly putting full brakes on it and throwing the engines into reverse and saying, oh no, we got to demonize Russia now because we've got to create this narrative of Russia colluding with Donald Trump's campaign. And if you could discuss that a little bit, I found that fascinating. This sudden need to do this 180.
Right. I mean, I think, if you look at the history of the Obama administration with Russia, it was pretty tight and positive up until they needed an enemy. Basically, my thesis is that the Obama administration framed Russia in order to frame Trump. Mm-hmm. And they had to frame Russia first. It's curious that just before I got on, I was reading a story in the Washington Post from June of 2016. It's the first story in which they break the fact that Russia's been hacking into, computers, right? Right. As late as June 2016, they had not lined up, at least in the media, the whole Trump-Russia part. Mm-hmm. So the argument in this article is, the thinking is, that they broke into DNC computers to find out what the DNC dirt was on Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a victim in this story, not a colluder. Mm-hmm. This is in June 2016.
Right.
But in 2015, for instance, Obama signs the Iran deal, and he thanks Russia fulsomely for their support. He couldn't have done it without them, Mm-hmm. It's a little rough spot when they annexed the Crimea, and they had to make believe that things were going awry, but he couldn't risk that. He could not risk alienating Russia certainly until the Iran deal was signed, because they were instrumental, because the mullahs have been in bed with the Soviets since since they went to many of them, half of them went to the school in Moscow, was it the Lenin Institute or whatever they called it, mm-hmm. To learn how to be a good Soviet citizen. Mm-hmm. So, that's the curious thing is you have to look at that history of the whole 8-year relationship, especially with the Clintons, right? Right. Why would they not want Hillary to be the president?
That's the thing that's always gotten me, about this, supposedly, and you point this out very well, Putin was so angry at Hillary, and he didn't want her to become president. And I'm thinking to myself, she did more to facilitate the transfer of technology, for example, through what you point out, through Skolkovo, right. And of course the Uranium One deal, which I personally have done a lot of work on for Judicial Watch. We've sued the State Department and Treasury, I believe, for records related to the sale of 20% of U.S. uranium, stores to the Russians via Uranium One, Frank Gistra, the Canadian company, and that whole story. And so. Why would Putin not want Hillary as president? To me, that's the logical next step. In that, in the thing you have to ask yourself. Anyone, I think, looking at the scene carefully and rationally would say, well, no, he would much rather have Hillary in there than Trump. But so you've got, and then of course you got Bill Clinton's ties with Rosatom, the Russian nuclear agency, effectively, right. which was involved, of course, in the purchase of Uranium One. And Bill Clinton then getting speaking fee, $500,000.
$500,000, right?
$500,000 for a half or an hour long,
right.
Talk blather about in Moscow about it's so transparently corrupt, and of course, that level of corruption, takes it down this whole other path, looking at Ukraine, which I know we're not really going to get into today, but and these political payoffs going to the family members of of these prominent politicos, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. You get Chris Hines, the stepson of John Kerry. John Kerry, meanwhile, of course, is he's the chairman or the head of CFIUS that has to approve all of these transactions, for foreign investment in the U.S. for national security assets. You have Nancy Pelosi's son, Paul Pelosi, who's involved in oil and gas in Ukraine. Apparently, everybody's involved. Every corrupt Democratic politician is involved in Ukraine somehow. I had no idea Ukraine was such a hotbed for Democrat investment, but
it's like California. You think it was it's hard to tell them apart. Except Ukraine's probably more stable.
more conservative probably as well. Yeah, toward the end of your chapter, you begin talking about Ben Rhodes' centrality to the Obama administration's foreign policy, and I find this kind of laughable. Ben Rhodes, apart from having a brother, David Rhodes, who was the head of CBS News, right. I think his sole qualification was he was the van driver for during the Obama campaign in 2008, and a would-be novelist, and suddenly he gets vaulted. I mean, talking about making a leap in your career from relative obscurity to great heights. But apparently, as you point out, he was calling the shots much.
Yeah, I mean, he was absurdly important. Given, you're right, the background you just described. But I think the critical part of what he could do for the Obama administration was he masterminded what they call the messaging campaigns,
right.
Especially for Iran, for instance, which they sold to the American public the same way they sold Obamacare, based on the stupidity of the American people, In
their words, right.
Yeah, and Obama, Ben Rhodes made the mistake of relaxing with a New York Times reporter in, I believe it was 2015 or 16, where he just let it all out. He said, the people we talk to, they're all stupid, they're 27 years old, they don't know anything about anything. They just report what we tell them,
Right. They create the echo chamber, I think it was,
And so when you look at the whole Russia collusion thing, it's a messaging campaign from the beginning.
Right.
And parts of that messaging campaign include, I think, a critical part. First, we start with the Steele dossier, Then we have this has been underestimated, but it's a critical part of it, was what they call the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment, which came out in early January. It came out, in fact, 4 days before the Steele dossier was published, back to back. Welcome to Washington, Donald Trump, right? Mm-hmm. Then I'd say the third part of the messaging campaign was the Mueller dossier, the Mueller report,
right.
Which was even though they couldn't nail him on collusion, they threw enough garbage in there to make his life difficult and to give the hope that the Democrats could take all this crap and formulate it into an impeachment process,
Which itself has devolved into this incredible third world star chamber type thing, where you're literally in the basement of the House of Representatives. Apparently, you have these secret hearings going on. Really, something worthy of I don't even want to insult East Germany during the Soviet era by ascribing something like that to them. Yeah. I mean, at least there was probably a veneer of fairness there, but there's nothing here. I mean, I'm not even sure if Republican representatives are allowed to attend these. Members of the Intelligence Committee are allowed to attend the hearings. I know that I think it was Devin Nunes had attempted to attend the hearing, but because he was with the Intelligence Committee and not with the, or rather with the Judiciary Committee. He was not with the Intelligence Committee. He was not allowed to attend. I mean, this is just stuff that I don't think anyone could have envisioned, 20, 30, maybe 10 years ago, this kind of thing taking place. But after everything you read about everything I read about in the selection of your book that I've gotten to read about what was going on during the Obama administration, I'm not surprised that we sort of devolved to that point.
No, I mean, it was a lawless administration, probably the most lawless in recent history. Mm-hmm. And I point that in the various chapters as we get to the end. And they weren't above, some really hardcore, dirty stuff. I mean, they sent the video maker of innocents of Muslims, the guy who made that video, to prison for a year, right?
Right, Nakula was it?
Yeah, and I've gotten to know a lot of the people. By the way, this is an upbeat book, and I'm not promoting the book now because it won't be out for months, but because what I do is I celebrate the heroes of the Samizdat.
Right.
And there must be 25 or 30 people I single out. I name as my MVP of the Samizdat Andrew Breitbart, who not only, he essentially created it, and he launched a lot of careers, including that of James O'Keefe, who's become a good friend of mine, who has played a major role, and then O'Keefe's disciple, David Daleiden, who busted Planned Parenthood. And they keep chipping away. So we get to November 2016, and you look at the lineup. They've got Hollywood, they've got Broadway, they've got all of the TV stations, all the major magazines. Hell, they won't even put a Melania on their cover, the most beautiful first lady in world history.
Right.
And they have all the networks except Fox. They have every single newspaper in the country. Not a single one of them endorsed Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, that's what's really remarkable, and I've pointed this out to other people. What's most remarkable to me is that when you had the entire national security apparatus of the United States government arrayed against Donald Trump's campaign, along with virtually the entire media, all of the tech, giant tech companies, the guy still won. I mean, that's the most incredible thing to my mind, was that he still managed to pull out a victory. So it may be the last election where that could happen. I'm not sure that could ever happen again, truthfully.
I think it could, because, and this is where, why I talk about the Samizdat, because every member listening to your show, Bill, or watching your show, who then decides to send a tweet with this link is a member of the Samizdat.
Right. That's how word gets out. I mean, it's that.
So, and because people, I give talks, you probably do too. People say, what can we do? I say, you can do something right now. You can send a picture of me with you to your friends and say, hey, read this book or follow this. Because today we have, and thanks to the internet, like Jack Dorsey at Twitter, the CEO, said, he goes, I never would have created this thing if I'd known it would lead to the election of Donald Trump. Right?
Right.
We're using their weapons against them. They created all this stuff not knowing that it would empower us much more than them, because they already were empowered,
That's very true. I mean, had it not been for Twitter, which gives Donald Trump an unfiltered means of communicating with the entire populace,
right,
he probably would not have achieved the heights that he has. We all kind of, he often, occasionally sends out a tweet which, makes you wince about someone's appearance or something. But as he says, if 90% of his, if only 10% of his tweets are, clinkers, maybe that's not such a bad track record. And he's able to convey this message, this real populist kind of a message, reminding Americans of what, the principles that undergird our civilization, what made us great. He can make us proud, to be Americans and to live in a country that is, that has these bedrock principles, the sense of, this notion of self-reliance and, and independence and accountability, personal accountability and everything else. And because we kind of tend to forget that in the great wash of liberalism and progressivism and so forth. So it's easy to lose sight of all that, but he has that means of communication, which, as you say, is somewhat ironic given the political leanings of the creators of these platforms.
And, admittedly, he's something of a BS artist, and a lot of things he says aren't true, but he's the most candid president in American history,
Right.
And what we had in Obama, we had a president who was mendacious to the core and was never candid and never shared anything. So,
right.
Is that a train? Or
my office happens to be astride I actually like the train, but it gives it makes me feel much closer to the heartland somehow. Here in D.C., I kind of like it. But you're absolutely right. But as you note, it's an amazing turn of the. Sort of the turning the tables, as you note, on the technologists and the liberal technologists that Donald Trump and the Samizdat in general have been able to use their technologies to get the word out, as you say, for this subversive, so-called subversive reporting that we're trying to do, right?
I begin the last chapter as I do the first chapter with a phone call. The first chapter, I get a phone call from Michael Cohen in 2011, asking me what I know about Barack Obama's origins, and I told him, let's forget about the origins. Let's talk about the authorship of his book, which I do know about. In the last chapter, I start with a call I get from Jerome Corsi, the reporter, investigative reporter. And I knew then that when the call came in, that he was in Mueller's crosshairs. He had not yet been subpoenaed by Mueller, so someplace in between. And I'm not sure. I don't record my phone calls. I'm much sloppier about this sort of stuff. Maybe I should be more careful, but I don't. And he had one question for me. And this question, I think, really goes to the heart of the way the media work today. And the question was, what do you know about Seth Rich? Right? Mm-hmm. Now, you and I say this, and all your audience says this, we all know who Seth Rich is. If we spoke to a bunch of Democrats, they wouldn't even know who we're talking about,
Right.
And they would know more, they would know more about Seth Rich than they knew about Frank Marshall Davis, or they knew about a whole lot of characters in Obama's past, right?
Well, it goes to the whole issue again of this blackout, this ability to just kind of black out certain topics and and avoid discussion of them, and which has very effectively tamped down. And actually, much of our work, I think, would get much wider exposure. Were it not for the fact that we're sort of on the enemy's list of the mainstream media. They to the extent they can, I think they avoid publishing some of our stuff. And we had a dynamite email that was just exposed between Hillary Clinton and Jake Sullivan just yesterday in a press release. We're talking about the Benghazi, talking points and what they knew about, the real facts behind Benghazi, the 2012 Benghazi disaster, and what Hillary knew, and that it was a pre-planned, there was a terrorist attack, and her personal email was right there, and had that email been released to us originally back when we first sought these records in 2014, then the American people would have known much earlier that Hillary had this whole personal email server that she was running all of her email traffic through. So all of this is being, we have the government trying to block records, keep records from us until a judge literally orders them to release them to us, and we've had to fight for 5 years to get those. And then you have the media sort of complicit in that and trying to cover up our discoveries to the extent that they can.
Indifference, and if they can't ignore you, they attack you.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Absolutely.
And you and I owe our careers basically to the fact that the media are not doing their job.
Right. That's very true. One of the last things, we're almost out of time here, but one of the last things I wanted to touch on was was an area that you and our mutual friend Diana West talk about. Diana talks about it a great deal. In fact, based on her, she wrote an entire a book called The Red Thread based on the subject. Is the ideological underpinnings of many of these anti-Trump cabal players. These socialist, Marxist ideological roots or philosophical leanings of, for example, John Brennan, James Comey, Christopher Steele, Nellie Orr. I wonder how much of that really came into play. Are these people? Is that what was motivating them? Is it just, we talk here often about, as about the deep state, and which I think is a wonderful term, in that it captures so well sort of the essence of what we face today in this sort of rogue government that exists purely to sort of perpetuate itself and grow its own power. But what is motivating these people, do you think? Is it just that? Is it just power and preserve power, or is there some sort of philosophical kinship with communism, with the Russians, even though they are on the surface antagonistic toward Putin?
That's a question, Bill, and I'm not sure either I or you or even Diana West knows the answer to that, but. What's fascinating, and your audience may not know this, is that, of course, Brennan has admitted he voted for a communist in the first time. Through how they let him into the CIA he admitted it to the CIA before they, James Comey, this is a shocker. had admitted in a newspaper, a New York Magazine article in 2003, that he had been a communist when he was younger, right?
And he still, to this day, is an acolyte of the socialist theologian Reinhold Niebuhr.
Right, exactly. And then you have Christopher Steele, who in the early 1980s was doing exactly the same thing that Barack Obama was doing, was fronting for the KGB-inspired anti-nuke movement. Obama's first published article was in defense of that hysteria, which lasted for about 2 years until Reagan said, "The heck with you guys," and planted the missiles in West Germany anyhow.
Right.
And then you have Nellie Orr, whose background is purely in Sovietology and has a sort of undisguised affection for the days of Joseph Stalin.
Right. She makes a comment in one of her, I believe it was her doctoral dissertation, about some of the, and Diana points this out very well, but some of the sort of the excesses of the mass slaughter of millions of people in the collectivization of the farms in Ukraine. Okay, yeah. Well, you could call it excesses. I mean, that's about the most generous descriptor I think you could use.
Hey, kill 6 million people.
Yeah, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Yeah.
What was the right? That's the what's the name? Walter Durante, famous New York Times guy.
Right. And the New York Times still has the Pulitzer that Durante was awarded for his fake reports about the wonders of the Soviet Union.
Obama still has a Nobel Prize, so you never know.
Well, he aspired to peace around the world, so that justified it. Well, Jack, I got to thank you very much for coming on the show today, and I can't wait for the book to come out. It's again, I know it's about to be submitted to the publishers and will come out in 4 or 5 months.
November 1, it better be there. In fact, the secret to all aspiring authors: make your deadline.
and the title again is Unmasking Obama?
Unmasking Obama. And the subtitle is A Fight to Tell the True Story of a Failed Presidency, and in which I celebrate the people, the Lilliputians who did all the fighting, often at their great peril to themselves.
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks for coming on. I can't wait to read the book, and I will pre-order my copy as soon as it's available on Amazon.
Okay. Hey, Bill, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, Jack, you take care. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on Inside Report. We had a great interview today with Jack Cashill. And please join us again next time. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Judicial Watch on Twitter and Instagram. And please visit us at judicialwatch.org. And if you like our work, we appreciate any support that you can give us. Thanks very much. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.